want to welcome everyone this morning. This is Beasley Allen's webinar, our first one. I want to thank you all for attending. And this whole thing, as I was driving into work this morning, I was thinking about all the technology that it takes to pull a webinar off, and it reminded me of a seminar talk I gave at the Southern Trial Lawyers Association probably 10 or 15 years ago when I was asked to speak on using trial presentation software during trial. And I was going to have this great presentation put together with all these fancy graphics and animations and videos. And I was going to show how you can use those on your computer during trial, and my computer crashed. And so one thing that you got to, I thought, well, one thing when you're giving a speech, you got to be ready if the computer crashes, although I realize today that's not possible. So I'm thankful to see that everything is going up and going. I want to thank my friend Mike Rafi, who really was my inspiration in doing this. At lunch one day, he told me about his webinar, encouraged me to do one, and taught me how he did it. And so I said, I'll do it too. And so here we are, and we're just excited to have you all on board. We do have CLE credit for today. We'll be paying for it and submitting it to the Georgia Bar on your behalf for those who attend this webinar. I do have an ambitious program today, so we'll get right into it. I kind of wanted to cover a lot of ground. I want you to get you feel like your time was well spent here today, and I'm pretty confident everyone will learn something, and some people may learn a lot. So I kind of wanted to do this first webinar about what I do, mainly what I do. My practice and a big part of what Beasley Allen does involves products liability cases. Products liability cases most often in my practice involve automobiles and car crashes. Everybody's got a car and everybody drives them a lot. And so that is a frequent source of cases for me in my practice. I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started in it. It was 20 years ago this year when I began practicing law. I was living in Birmingham, Alabama at the time, and I worked for a man who had a boutique firm where that's really all he did. The whole firm, that was their entire practice, was automobile products cases. And as a result, I spent a lot of time working on those cases. And I spent most of my days as a young baby lawyer at a place called Wheel Wrecker. For any of you who have ever handled an automobile product case, you've probably heard of that. That is the mecca of automobile product liability storage world, and where all the experts go. But being there allowed me the opportunity to learn a lot. I could pick the brains of experts. I could look at the parts and get in the cars and see how they worked and see how they failed, what could have been done differently. And that was just a big benefit to me. But early in those days, it was really neat that we could go and look at the car. I could have an expert point out to me and say, look, Chris, the roof crushed. Look at these marks on the belt. It failed. Look at the tire tread. And you could see with your eyes how it failed. But things have changed so much in the automotive product world. You can't always see the defect these days. Cars are so much more advanced than they were the 20 years ago when I started this, when we're spending most of our time back then on the Ford Explorer rollovers, the Firestone tire D-treads, and I've kind of see it evolve over time. We went from that to the next really big thing that we saw in the auto product world was the Toyota unintended acceleration. And then after that, we saw the General Motors ignition switches, and my partner and friend Lance Cooper was integral to those, and we were thankful to get to work with him on those cases. And then something that we're still seeing, which was really big, largest recall in the history of the world, was the Takata airbag. And I will talk a little bit about that today because those cases are still out there, and I'm going to educate you a little bit about what to look for in finding those cases. So let's get started. As I said, let's see here. I can pull up this presentation. And here we go. All right. So as I stated, we have a new world when I first started doing this, really, there were very few recalls. I mean, the Firestone tire got recalled. They didn't recall the Explorer, but most of the defects I saw on a day-to-day basis didn't involve a recall. It was just us as plaintiff lawyers saying, hey, this vehicle's defective. But what we're seeing now is NHTSA's in a new day. They are recalling products, and when the car manufacturers aren't doing the right thing, they're not following the law as they are supposed to report defects, as they are supposed to get defective vehicles off the road through recalls, they're being fined. And we've seen one record fine after the other in probably the last 10 years, really going back to about 2014 until present. Mercedes-Benz was recently fined, Volkswagen was recently fined, Toyota was recently fined a big fine. And so those are big. As you can see, beginning in 2014, recalls shot off the charts. And now thankfully they've dropped down a little bit as a result of really getting a lot of the Takata airbags off the roadway, is what you'll see that. And the numbers here are a little bit old. What we see is that they come out a few years after they're released, and so we hope to have new numbers lately, and hope that recalls continue to drop and that cars continue to be made safely without defect. But like I said, this is a different world. You can't always look at a car on the outside after it's been in a crash and immediately tell what's wrong with that car. One example is the Jeep Cherokee. It made national headlines. It was on TV about how these vehicles could be hacked. And I'll show you a little clip. We won't spend a long time watching this, but this is a clip that you can watch.
It's not fun to have your 2-ton SUV's brakes hacked just as you're parking in front of a ditch.
Okay, hold on tight. Hold on. Oh.
That's what I've learned from Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek, a pair of hackers who have spent the last year developing a piece of software that can wirelessly sabotage this 2014 Jeep Cherokee. It hasn't been altered in any way. There are no devices.
So what you see here is a car that is so controlled by a computer that it can be hacked outside by another computer and controlled the way that it drives, the way that even things such as the air conditioner, the radio, the braking system, the acceleration. The days of cars operating on wires and cables that connect the accelerator to the engine are gone. It's all now electrical, goes through a computer, and those computer systems can be hacked. And so it's a different world. You would have to almost have a knowledge of the software system in order to understand what happened in this and the fault codes. And those are the things that we at Beasley Allen are looking for in those type cases. I mentioned the Takata airbag recall. 63 million Takata airbags have been recalled in the last 7 years, and they're still recalling them today. I have a law partner whose family member just had one of their cars just recalled this year, and 7 years later, they're still coming off the roadway. The Takata problem. Look, it shouldn't have been rocket science to Takata. They were using a material called sodium iodide as a propellant. It is inexpensive. It's readily available. It's almost always used as a fertilizer. You've heard of sodium iodide. It was used when the Albert P. Murrah building was bombed in Oklahoma City. That was what was used to make the bomb to blow up that building. Back when Clinton was the president, and they put this sit in an airbag, and then what you can see here on the screen is the inflator on an airbag. And these sodium iodide are like little aspirin pills, little white. The propellant that fills the bag with gas. It's not filled with air. It's filled with gas. And what happens is over time, these little white aspirin looking pellets that are sodium iodide break down, and they break down. And once they become like a powdery substance, they explode with greater force than intended. And when they do that, the sodium iodide will explode the entire airbag. And I got a video here. I'll show you of it. But sodium iodide was never phase stable, is what the term in the engineering term is, which what you got to understand is that it's got to be able to stay in that aspirin form for years and years and years. And when sodium iodide gets moisture or humidity or exposed to the outside elements, it'll break down, and that causes the Takata airbag to fail when it's supposed to protect you, and it actually turns into a weapon and injures you. Here is a video. This was a test done by the National Highway Traffic Safety Institute, where they actually tested a airbag, and it's unbelievable to watch how forceful and watch this explosion. That goes off in your face when this defect fails. And I have had countless clients who've had that exact thing happen in their face. We do a lot of Takata airbag cases in our firm, and it saddens me every time. I'll show you a little bit about, if you're squeamish, you might want to turn away. But here, these are some of my clients. And this is what happens to you when an airbag goes off, and the metal, it turns into a bomb. The metal fragments come out of the airbag, and they become what's shrapnel, just like a hand grenade. It's used in the military. It's no different at all. And the very first Takata case, I believe, that was detected was in Alabama. The second one was in Florida, and the lady had been hit in the throat. She had bled out and died. The police were investigating it as a murder because they thought somebody stabbed her in the throat, until they found the shrapnel there, and were able to determine that it came from the airbag. Proving these cases is somewhat of a CSI type analysis. One of the things that you can do is you can pull the radiological records. And for instance, you can see, in this one, is that there was a foreign body found in the chest. This foreign body turned out to be metal. Another thing that you can do is, here's another one. This is from a discharge summary, and it had metal foreign body found in the breast. You can also look at the airbag itself. And as you can see there on the side of the screen, the hole in the fabric of the airbag, that's certainly not supposed to be there. And what happened was that metal shot through the bag and into my client's breast, causing that serious laceration. This is another case that I'm currently litigating in New Orleans, involving the Ford Ranger. The Ford Ranger is quite possibly one of the more dangerous Takata airbags because of the way the inflator's made on the driver's side. You can see it up in the corner there, and it comes out like a shotgun slug. There's a metal round piece that goes in that hole that's missing, and when it explodes, it shoots out at you. My client is what I believe the only living victim of the Ford Ranger. I'm not certain about that Takata defect, but he happened to be leaning over when it hit, and it hit his shoulder. Had he been centered on the airbag, it would have gone through the middle of his chest and likely killed him. That's the back of his arm. It went all the way through. Another way to prove the defect in the Takata airbag is just finding the pieces. There's a piece of the inflator there. It's torn to pieces and easily can be detected as a Takata failure. Another one, proving the Takata defect. You can see here all the things that are put together. You got the hole in the bag. You find the metal shrapnel. And you've got the medical records. Here we got the metallic foreign body found in this unfortunate woman's face. So that's about the Takata airbag, but there's a lot of other defects we'll be talking about today. And as we go through those, self-driving cars are on everybody's mind that does car wreck cases. I've talked to countless lawyers who are concerned about that. People are even trying to look forward to see whether we should be changing our practices, because many lawyers do rely so heavily on car wreck cases. And what happens when the person that we're bringing the lawsuit against is no longer driving? Do they even have to have insurance if they're not driving at all? The car is. And so those are questions that society will have to be answering over the next few years. And this is a little bit of a taste of what I think will be part of the answer to those questions. This is
what it would be like behind the wheel of a self-driving car. Sitting just as you are, your hands are not on the wheel. Your feet are not on the pedals, and your eyes don't even have to be on the road. At Mercedes-Benz, we've road-tested autonomous driving over 10,000 miles on highways and in heavy city traffic. The future of the automobile. Brought to you by Mercedes-Benz. The best or nothing.
So if my hands are not on the wheel, my feet are not on the pedal, and my eyes don't even have to be on the road, then Mercedes, you better do a good job of driving me. And I believe that these car wreck cases that we see, if that becomes the case, that cars can self-drive to that level, and they can't today, no matter what you're reading in the news, and we'll talk about that. But if cars get to that level, then yes, Mercedes, you're and all the car manufacturers, you'll be responsible, I predict, for what happens to what consumers and occupants of vehicles who are injured when the vehicles crash, and they will crash. Nearly autonomous technology is already here. It's been here for a number of years. You likely have autonomous technology in your car already. All of the cars in my house have automatic braking systems where if I don't brake in a certain amount of time, the brakes will engage for me. All of my cars have lane departure. So if I start to drift off of the roadways, different actions will take place. One of my cars, the steering wheel vibrates. One of my cars, there's a beep. One of my cars, my daughter's car, will actually pull you back on the road. She needs that. And so there's all kind of different technology that we have in our cars already today that are automatic. There's cars that can actually drive themselves, purport to, such as the Tesla. And so, and Mercedes has a version and a few others. So nearly autonomous technology is here already. We're looking for these cases. If you have a case where somebody your client rear ends someone else, you think, well, that's not a case. Or your client gets rear-ended by somebody else, and you think, well, they have very low limits of liability coverage. Maybe there's an additional defendant here. Maybe the car behind it had automatic braking system and it didn't work. And for those we're looking at those type cases when we're reviewing these cases. We're litigating one now in Savannah, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is an impressive, one of the theories that you'll see in these cases is warnings cases. And y'all all know Georgia has what I believe to be one of the better warnings laws in the country. And Georgia has a continuing duty to warn. And so what these car companies are saying about their systems could be used in the future in litigation. And so this is one that I thought was particularly interesting that was put out by Mercedes.
It's chaos out there, but the MClass sees in your blind spot. Pulls you back into your lane. Even brakes all by itself. It's almost like it couldn't crash, even if it tried. The 2014 MClass.
I promise you, every car can crash, and they have. Tesla, who's one of the forefronts in the technology, as far back as 2018, had a driver killed when the Tesla was on autopilot. The Google car has had hundreds of failures and 13 near misses as far back as 2016. This is a funny video this is that automatic braking system I'm talking about in a Volvo. I think this is maybe a Volvo XC60, and they're running a test. Listen to 10. 5. This is my favorite part.
Головним завданням залишається безпека водія і пасажирів. Що нам і продемонстрували хлопці з Volvo. Дивимося це в заповідненому повторі.
Listen to the cameras going.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had some kind of mishap in the testing here.
Yes, they had some sort of mishap in the testing for sure. That vehicle was supposed to stop on its own. You notice there wasn't even an occupant in the car. Leaked internal Uber documents were reported back in March of 2017, showing that the progress of that car was extremely rocky. This is an example of how a autonomous vehicle can fail. And I want you to watch this closely. What we've got here is a dash camera that this driver is about to stop at a red light. And notice this is not your typical rural over the roadway red light, but it's more like one you would see in a big city where the red light is on the side of the road. Watch this, the Uber self-driving car as it comes to this red light. So you see the dash camera truck stops. Now there goes the Uber car runs right through the red light, and there's a pedestrian crossing the road right there who is nearly missed as the Uber vehicle does not detect the red light and just runs the red light. That vehicle was supposed to detect the red light and stop. It did not. And that's the type of systems that we got on the roadway now. We've talked about it, but these legal issues that we will be facing as cars are autonomously driven by the vehicle itself will arise, and we'll have to address those. And I think the law is uniquely situated to handle these. And I'm confident that we'll have a fair and way system to evaluate the fault. Georgia has a great way to do the allocation of fault between the driver and the vehicle. If the driver is not supposed to be driving at all, then it's the car's fault. And so, or vice versa. Uber halts its driverless car test. And this is back in 2019. This is the Tesla system. And I actually showed this to one of my coworkers yesterday who has a Tesla, and she was flabbergasted. She was telling me how much she enjoyed her Tesla. And I told her, keep your hands on the wheel and your foot near the brake if you're on autopilot, because this is this kind of system, or this is the type of driving that the Tesla is supposed to be able to do. This is an interstate type situation where you're not at all in a rural roadway where you don't have white lines, you don't have the typical roadway setup in rural settings where autopilot has a difficult time detecting the road. This is perfect for Tesla, and yet it failed. And watch this. This is a very unfortunate situation where a Tesla driver was on autopilot in China. This young man died. There's a truck stopped in the road that it does not detect. And this is a Volvo pedestrian avoidance. Again, lots of cars have this now at slow speeds. It's supposed to detect a pedestrian and stop the vehicle. This was a dealer kind of bragging a little bit about the system to a purchaser, and he's going to show how the vehicle stops. Very trusting of pedestrian braking system. So they're all out, and watch how it works. Obviously, it didn't work. The first fatality involving a self-driving vehicle occurred on March 18, 2018 in Tempe, Arizona. As you can see in the bottom corner that the driver was completely asleep at the time of impact. The vehicle was traveling at 38 miles per hour, and it was 450 feet away when a pedestrian stepped into the roadway and hit that pedestrian. It did not detect the pedestrian despite being on a straight roadway with no obstacles. After the wreck happened on March 18, 2018, the case settled on March 28, 2018. Most of my cases don't settle in 10 days after they happen, but Uber reaches a settlement with the family of the victim killed in that in that unfortunate event. Now, these systems have what's called LiDAR on them. It's like a radar. It's kind of like a laser radar system. And 1.3 seconds before the impact, the LiDAR system did detect the passenger. It did determine that emergency braking was needed, but emergency braking was not available and when the computer was under control. And so it didn't brake. It didn't do anything. What was the problem? Did it have too few sensors, improper sensors? Were they improperly calibrated? Was the programming off? And in that situation, it wasn't programmed to emergency brake. Post-crash records of that Uber revealed some problems with the system. Excuse me, that wasn't Uber. I think that was, let's see. Yeah, Uber system was that it had difficulty driving through construction zones. Drivers had to intervene far more frequently than desired, had difficulty time navigating streets in busy city centers, picking up and dropping off passengers, and dealing with geography like hills. If we can't deal with hills with this system, maybe we shouldn't, maybe it's not ready yet, because where I drive, there are a lot of hills and a lot of those type obstacles. This is a case that my firm is litigating at present. This tractor trailer on your left here is the striking vehicle. Our client was sitting stopped in traffic. It came to us as an 18-wheeler case. The trucking company only had $1 million in coverage. And so we were able to collect that $1 million for our clients. But yet, this is a death case. This is the case that we're litigating in Savannah. We're like, we have to try to figure out a way to do something more for this family. They've lost so much. And we learned that this truck had an active braking system that puts a visual audio warning into the cab saying you need to brake. And then it starts to brake itself if the driver doesn't respond to the audio visual aid. Then if the driver still doesn't respond, it goes full on braking with no driver input. That's how it's supposed to work. But yet the black box download of our crash shows that the tractor trailer never braked before impact. And the driver of the tractor trailer, who was the defendant in our trucking case, says it never worked. I never heard a visual or audio warning. Those are some things to think about that we've talked about that are new. And like I said, you can't see those when you are evaluating a case. It's not like the seatbelt broke or the roof crushed or the tire detreaded, where you can actually see a car burn up. Those were back in those days, and we could always see it. And we're still doing those cases. I want to talk a little bit about those now, but the ones I've been talking about require a little bit more analysis, and I'm proud of our team of investigators at Beasley Allen. We have two former SCIRT state troopers who trained other state troopers on how to perform acts of reconstructionist. They can download everything that can be downloaded. They are great, knowledgeable experts in their own right, work in-house for us, and they are always on the road, downloading black box and able to determine when these computer systems fail. So these are some kind of the standard automotive product liability cases, and we still see these. Of the list that I've got in front of you there, I've probably got a case right now involving all but 3 of those defects. And so we're still seeing those, and I'll talk to you a little about what I call the traditional automotive product liability cases. This was a case that I tried back a couple of years ago, and it involved a Toyota 4Runner that rolled over and the axle failed. So this is an axle failure, single vehicle rollover case. When we got this case, it had been turned down. We're like, who do you sue? You can't sue anybody. It was a high school girl who was driving on her way to a job interview, and she was headed into the job interview. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She hadn't gone to college yet, and she's want to intern in the summer at the veterinarian clinic, so that when she got to college, she'd have some experience in being a veterinarian. She loses control goes off the roadway to the right. That was her fault. We admitted that at trial. She went off the road. But what she did, like a lot of young teenage drivers would do, she overcorrected back to the right, and she pulled the vehicle back to the right. She goes over the center line now to the left as she gets back on the roadway, realizing I've got to get back now in my lane. And so she pulls back to the right. As she corrects to the right, she is in a very controllable situation. She's not driving too fast. This is a recoverable situation. There are no other cars on the roadway, but something happens. Her axle fails while she's undergoing these yaw forces on the left rear axle, and it fails. It begins to wobble in the wheel well, losing her ability to recover this swerve. She ultimately rolls over and dies. She would not have rolled over but for the failure of the axle. And I'll be talking more about this case in an upcoming webinar, but I want to talk about it here to say a lot of these cases, it's just a single vehicle involved in the wreck. There's not a car that you could that hits you. There's not a driver even that you can sue, and you're the passenger. For in this case, we represented the driver who originally lost control of the vehicle, and so just be on the lookout for those type cases. This is this is the biggest defect I see, other than Takata airbags. This is the biggest defect that I see today, and it's rear impact crashworthiness. Cars are strenuously tested for frontal impacts. They do frontal impacts. They do full barrier. They do offset frontal. IIHS does some very extreme offset frontal, which is very difficult to pass. And so the car companies know that based on the standards set by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, as well as the industry standards like IIHS that gives star ratings that the public sees, they have to make a car safe for occupants in a frontal impact, and they do most of the time. But yet there aren't the same type standards either from government or from the industry for rear impact. And so what do? Many car companies completely ignore the exact same technology that they use to protect the front occupant. They don't put it in the back. Look at these. You've got 4 pictures of cars. If I were to look at these, not knowing what I know, I could not put them together, because these vehicles were all the two that go together, all underwent the exact same forces of the crash, the exact same speeds. By just basic physics, they should have turned out the same, but they're not designed the same. The SUV at the top, the red SUV, hit the back of that Toyota vehicle. The SUV driver, completely uninjured, gets out of the car and is fine. Young man in the back of the Toyota is killed. Same exact forces, crushed the Toyota, because it's not designed to be safe in rear impacts. They don't have to test for it, and so they don't. Look at that Jeep. It doesn't even look like it was in a crash at all. Yet that was the Honda that it hit in front of it. It's completely demolished. And the young man that was sitting in the back seat of that Honda today is paralyzed from the neck down, and he is a wonderful young man, and we're fighting for him to get him some help. Tire defects, as I mentioned earlier, you can see those, but tires aren't supposed to fail. The detread tires is a telltale sign of a defective tire. You've got aged tires, old tires. You got just negligently or defectively designed tires. And so anytime a tire detreads, it's worth looking at whether there was a defect there. They can cause crashes. And one of the things the car companies do in defending these is they say, like a lot of their defenses, that the driver should have done something different. It's not our fault. Yeah, our tire failed, but the driver should have recovered. they should have been able to maintain the roadway even with the failed tire. And so in order to prove that, they ran a test. They wanted to show that when the tire fails, it's no problem. You can control the vehicle. And so this is a test that was run produced in litigation. Obviously, it lost control. It wasn't supposed to, and you could tell that they didn't expect it to. But yet, they knew that tire, and it's not confidential, by the way. On the bottom, it says that. But those people knew, but when they were running that test, they knew the tire was going to fail. They had a trained driver, an expert driver behind the wheel, and they knew exactly when it was going to happen. I don't know. You don't know. My wife doesn't know when the tire is going to fail, if it's going to fail. They're not trained expert drivers. If these expert drivers can't control it when a tire fails, how's your mom supposed to do it? And so we're able to determine when the tire fails and pursue those cases. Door latch cases are something. The doors are part of the restraint system of a vehicle. You have to keep the door closed in a crash, and yet sometimes they don't. This was a Mazda that was the Mazda vehicle here was co-designed by Ford. And when I got it, I realized something's not right here. Look at the door. The door crush on the frame of that door is different than the roof. And so what I knew is that those two things were not in the same place the entire crash. The door had to have come open and experienced the force, the roof didn't. And so I was able to determine that the door opened in the crash. That allowed the seat-belted driver to be partially ejected out of the vehicle. She hit her head as she was coming back in on the roof, and it caused her to have a brachial plexus injury. I'll never forget going into her living room the very first time I met her, and she says, "Mr. Glover, I'll never get married." She was a high school kid, and she says that was her concern. I'll never get married. Who would want to marry a girl who can't change a baby's diaper? Because she had no use of her arm. I was able to help her. We were able to get her more medical treatment. We were able to get her a great recovery to help her. She graduated college. She's married. She has a baby today. And that's what we can do through these cases. We have the ability to kind of help put your life back together in a lot of ways. And so we can't always do that. But one thing we can do for sure is we can prevent this from happening to other people. And I've seen that. Cars are safer today than they were back in 2000 when I started doing this. Roofs are better, airbags are better, seatbelts are better. Everything is better than it was 20 years ago. But yet there's still progress to be made. This was a case that I tried in Gwinnett County, and I got this case in the very first, and it had been turned over or turned down, excuse me, by other law firms. But I represented a young lady who was in the passenger seat of that Jeep Wrangler. The very first thing that I noticed was that the seatbelt was still latched post-crash. On the day of the crash, the client was at home. Her daughter was 15 years old. She had her driver's permit, and she wanted to drive on her way to work at the grocery store today. And she asked her mom, said, "Hey, Mom, I got to go to work. Can you drive me can I drive as we go to the grocery store?" And so they get the car, they leave. The little girl loses control. Again, it was her fault. She lost control. She was an inexperienced driver. She rolled over. Yet the little girl in the driver's position isn't ejected. She's safe. She's got a few scratches, but she's uninjured. The mom's ejected out of the seatbelt. She is thrown hundreds of feet through the air and lands on the roadway ahead of where the crash occurred. A young man, another high school kid, sees the crash, gets up, runs to the mother laying in the roadway, and the mother, her dying words were, "But I was wearing my seatbelt. But I was wearing my seatbelt." Just kept repeating that over and over again. And she couldn't understand how it was that she had her seatbelt on, yet here I am laying in the roadway. Her daughter, thankfully, had a better seatbelt. You know, when I drove into the office today to film this, I put on the seatbelt in my driver's seat. But you know where there wasn't? There wasn't anybody in the passenger seat. There wasn't anybody in the back seat. And matter of fact, it's probably been about a week since anybody sat in my car. Most often, all of our cars are only occupied by the driver position. So if a car company wanted to save some money and play the odds, they could statistically bet that, well, let's put the safest seatbelt in the driver's position. We'll put a cheaper one in the passenger position. And guess what? There probably won't be anybody there if this vehicle's in a crash anyway. That's exactly what happened on this vehicle. They had an extra safety system on the driver's side that locked in the rollover and protected the driver while the passenger was ultimately ejected and killed. And just thankful to get a very nice verdict for the client in that case. After that case was over, that little girl called me after we had won, and she was crying on the phone, and she said, "Mr. Glover, thank you. I had always thought that I killed my mom, but now I know I didn't." We made a difference in that case. We made a difference that was able to give her some peace, knowing that it wasn't her inexperience. That crash shouldn't have killed her mom. She should have walked away from it just like she did. But unfortunately, they made a decision to put a cheaper seatbelt in that vehicle, and it didn't protect the mom. Fuel system defects are a big problem today. We've got a big case right now in our firm involving a Jeep that exploded. It's a Jeep Cherokee exploded. It happened in Cobb County. We're litigating it in Gwinnett County. But you can see here that the striking vehicle is this white sedan. It hits the back of the Jeep Cherokee at very low speeds. As you can see, the white sedan there is basically fine. The driver of the sedan got out, was uninjured. He was fine. There's police videos of him on the scene, and he's talking to people. He's clearly upset for having caused the crash, but the truth is he shouldn't have killed this girl. He was fine. He was in the same forces she was in, yet her car explodes. Folks, this isn't the movies. It is reasonable to ask anytime a car catches on fire why. In car crashes on the movies, they all blow up and there's fire and it's exciting. It shouldn't happen on real roadways. And this one happened, we say, because the fuel tank was placed behind the rear axle in the crush zone of the vehicle. It was placed in a place where they knew it was going to get hit. They knew it could crush. And when it crushes, it'll explode. And this poor, unfortunate lady, she died, she burnt to death in this crash. This is another case that we're litigating now. This is a really exciting case for us. This is a new system. Cars have had anti-submarining devices in them for years. It's not new. What they want you to do, what they want the system to do, is to prevent your knees from what's called submarining forward, which would make you go down, and your hips would kind of what's called submarine. And what can happen is the lap belt then loads your abdomen. The seat belts are designed to be on the hard surfaces of the body, like your chest, your shoulder, and your hip bones. When they get up onto your soft abdomen, they can cause internal bleeding and kill you. So they can design a seat to prevent that from happening. Well, they decided to, hey, let's use an airbag instead of designing the seat that way. And so they put an airbag in the seat that kind of is supposed to deploy and keep you seated correctly. The problem is if it goes late, like airbags sometimes do, if the sensor system isn't perfect, if it doesn't get the airbag, the wreck detected in time and deploy that airbag in time, then your body can, instead of preventing you from moving forward, can have already moved forward, and it goes off under you. And that's exactly what happened. In this case, really just destroyed my client's back because she was sitting over this airbag when it deployed. So we ran a test. We put 100 pounds of weights over the airbag. See, how strong is this airbag if you're sitting on it when it goes off? And so watch this. That airbag is strong enough to knock 100 pounds of steel weights off of that seat. My little client who weighed 100 pounds had no chance when that airbag went off late and she was sitting over it. Another airbag case, a frontal airbag case. Airbags have speeds at which they're supposed to go off. They have different speeds, but this particular case was supposed to go off at about 28 miles an hour. Look at that little crash. That was a nothing. It broke the headlights, a little bit of damage to the hood. The hoods are designed to fold up in crashes. It takes almost no energy to do that. Those are called crumple zones, and they're supposed to do that. And so this was a very, very low speed crash, way less than 10 miles an hour. Yet the airbag deployed and blinded my client. And so we tried this case and had a good result. That's a crash a case to be looking for. Another one is a side impact airbags. A lot of cars are designed with side impact airbags these days. Almost all cars are now. And they need to protect you. This one, look at this. Look at the side of the car that has no damage. Look at the side of the car that's got extreme damage. This car got sideways and hit a telephone pole. And when it hit that pole, the airbag on the wrong side of the car went off. Not the one where the impact occurred, which would have protected my client. He died of a head injury shortly after impact. And they didn't put the sensors in the right place to detect this crash. They saved money by only putting sensors in the front of the vehicle and not in the location where the crash occurred, so they couldn't get good information from the crash and deploy the wrong airbags. Seat backs, seats are not supposed to fail. They're part of the restraint system, just like the airbag, just like the seat belt, just like the door I talked about earlier. And what happens is if the seat belt holds you in the front, but yet the seat back falls back, several things can happen. One, you basically can get shot out like a bottle rocket, and you can be ejected from the vehicle. You can hit the roof. If it falls back enough, you can hit the back seat and can end up most often causes paralysis, and it's very sad. But the seat back needs to hold you up against that seat belt in order to protect you in the crash. Heavy trucks. A lot of people, everybody knows about the cases against trucking drivers and trucking companies, but there are cases for the truck driver. A lot of vehicles have what's called cab guards on them. And those cab guards are sold to truck drivers to protect them in the event the load shifts forward. And our firm handles a lot of these type cases. This is an animation that we made in a cab guard case involving a load of lumber that there's actually logs that as this vehicle tips over, you see how there it goes, and it fails and crushes the driver, unfortunately. But that vehicle was equipped with a cab guard that was designed or sold to protect the occupant in the event that exact situation happened, and yet it failed and crushed. Our firm built a cab guard with the help of some experts. They designed it for us, engineers, and said if they would have made it this strong, it would have prevented the load. So we went out, we tested it, and it would have, in fact, prevented the load from shifting forward. And we've handled lots of these cases and tried a number of them as well. Roofs on trucks are terrible. There's no standards other than some industry standards that are new coming out, but there are no federal standards for protecting drivers of tractor trailers. And if they assume these things can't roll over, so let's don't worry about the roof. Well, they can roll over, and they do. And when they do, it's so easy to protect these drivers of these trucks by making a stronger roof that would protect them, keep the compartment from crushing down on them, but yet most often they don't do so, and we litigate a lot of these cases. Trucks are not supposed to catch on fire, just like cars aren't supposed to catch on fire. And you see this when a good bit. Matter of fact, on 85, I think 2 weeks ago, there was an 18-wheeler that caught on fire. I watched a very similar scene to what we are looking at here unfold on television. And so we litigate these cases a lot. One of the defects that you see is the placement of the fuel system relative to an ignition source. In this case, you can see that they put the battery of the tractor trailer right next to the tank. Well, you've got an electrical ignition source next to a flammable fuel source, the tank, and if you get impacted in that area, then it's predictable that a fire could occur. And one of the solutions here is to move the battery. If you take the battery out of that area, you can put it between the frame rails to protect the fuel system, then this won't occur. And so anyway, that's an overview. Of course, there are so many more defects. When I talk to lawyers and they say, Chris, I'd love to work with you, I don't know what to look for. I don't know. I gave you probably a sample of what we're doing right now. It's not even all. I've got 13 partners that do just what I do. I haven't, those are my cases. Those are not even the other 12 of them and what they do. And so I'll say, look, if you've got a catastrophic injury or death, just let us look at it, because I couldn't possibly put together a presentation like this that went over everything, and it's changing. By the time I got it put together, I'd have to redo it and do a new one. And so those are the type things that we look for. There's a lot more than that. And so anyway, I am thankful that you all joined me today for the webinar. I'm thrilled to be able to have done it for you, and I've had a great time going through this presentation and talking about these defects. So anyway, that's the end of the presentation. I see that there are some questions here, or some, let's see. Yeah, absolutely. I think because this is CLE credited, one of the questions is, will you make the slides available? I'd be happy to. And so if you'll email me, chris.glover@beasleyallen.com, I'd be happy to provide those to you. Also, it says, are there claims for rear crashworthiness of a motorcycle? You know, all vehicles, according to civil law, should be made safe for crashes. But the problem is, what's your alternative design? You have to, in most jurisdictions, you have to show where there is a better alternative. And the problem with a motorcycle is that there isn't really an alternative design. They're all unsafe for rear crashes. There's just not enough. There's not enough structure or restraint systems to protect you in any kind of direction, really, for a motorcycle. And so that wouldn't be a case that I pursue. One of the things that shocks a lot of people is how many of these cases we turn down versus how many we're able to take. We look at, I think, 19 or cases before we find one that we can pursue. Thankfully, our cars are not mostly defective. Thankfully, most cars are made safe, and car companies do a really good job of putting safe cars on the roadway. And so we look at a lot of car wrecks and a lot of real sad injuries where we say, you know what, we don't see anything that went wrong in this situation. But for that one that is a problem, then we want to pursue that to help the client and to try to make a difference in the future. And so, we've looked at lots of motorcycle cases. I didn't talk about it on here, but I resolved a motorcycle crash case probably 2 years ago involving a helmet that came off of the motorcycle driver's head in the crash. We showed that he would have lived had his helmet stayed on. His brain injury that he ultimately died for occurred after the helmet came off. And so there's just, I guess we were talking earlier, there's so many different things to look at. Many of you are familiar with the Suzuki defect that was tried in Georgia recently. That went to the Supreme Court, and that case involved a braking system that was defective on a motorcycle. So lots and lots of different defects. Any other questions? If you got a question, feel free to type it in. I'll be happy to try to answer it if I can. As we wrap up here, I think we got a few more minutes. Okay. Looks like somebody raised their hand. If you can, type the question in the Q&A section here. There's at the bottom, there's a Q&A. If you've got a question, feel free to type it. All right. Absolutely. Good question. Statute of repose issues in Georgia are an issue. When you have, I've got cases now in Georgia where the vehicle is older than the statute of repose would allow. In those cases, you really need to look at them close, because you've basically got to show one of two things. One, that they had a duty to warn and they didn't do it, because the duty to warn is regardless of the statute of repose, but you got to be able to meet the elements of the duty to warn and the continuing duty to warn. And so things that you might want to show in cases like that would be that they had problems that they knew about. That same problem developed itself over time. They learned about it and never told the consumers about the problem. Or you got to show that there was basically wanton conduct. That's a high standard. It was found in the Walden case, for instance, involving the Jeep Cherokee. Our case involves a Jeep Cherokee. We're hopeful that we'll be able to show that the design of the Jeep Cherokee fuel system was wanton, and so we can get around the statute of repose that way. Another question: in Alabama, it was easy to collaborate. How will it work in Georgia? I guess you're talking about collaborate with the lawyer, our lawyers. And so give me a call. I'd be happy to talk with you. I'd be happy to email with you. My cell phone number is 334-202-1611. My email address again is chris.glover@beasleyallen.com. I've been in Georgia now for 5 years. My family's there and love it. And our office is up to 11 attorneys. We are thrilled about the opportunity to represent so many people. We continue to grow. We're about to hire another lawyer. And so things are great. Our Georgia office is doing wonderful. Thank you all for the time you've given us this morning. I want to be punctual and get you out in an hour as I promised. I hope you learned something. I hope that this was enjoyable and insightful. I hope that you are able to take this information and use it to help your clients and make the roadways a little safer. Wish you all the best of days. Take care. Bye-bye.